us here. If everybody's happy, we'll have a start. We did Weybourne, which is the most popular of the dive sites along the reef, last week, but that was as part of sort of daytime sessions, and the impression we get is that evenings are better now, so we'll try to do evenings, and we'll probably return and do Weybourne next week or the week after for the evening shift, so nobody feels left out. So we've done the whole set. Okay, so what I was going to do first of all is really share some sort of outline bathymetry of the site as a whole. And I think what I've stupidly not done is I've not run Google Earth up. So if I send Dawn up, Dawn will share her Google Earth, because she's got all the mapping on, and you can see, roughly speaking, what the layout of the site is. A bit like Weybourne, it's a pretty sandy site. So Scots folk like like Pete will think, oh, there's no rock here. What kind of dive is this? And you can see from the bathymetry that's up now that essentially it's a very level, very gradually sloping site. Whereas for Pete used to diving Oban, west coast of Scotland, once you're 50 meters offshore, you could be down at 40-50 meters. Here, this range is about 300-400 meters, and those deepest points are just beyond 10 meters. This is a very level site. I can see Dawn's little hand moving around, and one of the reasons for showing all these traces is to show the kind of coverage we've got. This is a mixture of tracks, which you can see traced out where we've dragged an SMB around the site, and dotted marker points where those are the places people have dived out to and recorded on their Seasearch forms. Ooh, so Dawn's measuring up. So it's about 500 meters out. So that's a good swim. And I think the two green ones you can see were complete blanks. Those were dives where we only saw sand, and they mark kind of the western extent of reliable interest for this dive site. Most of the blue ones have something interesting on. And in a moment, if I wave my, can you see my cursor, Dawn? I'm moving it around so you can't at the minute. Okay, well, no problem. If you could move on to, Dawn, the wood reef. We'll talk about the Vera separately. So most people go to dive the Vera, which is a well-known shore diveable wreck. But the latest point of interest, if you keep zooming in, is the wood reef. And this is a fantastic bathymetry. Now, back out a bit. This is fantastic bathymetry that Rob has so really nicely rendered for us with this hill shade, or hill shading, so that it casts shadows. But you can see these features are very interesting, but they're not very big. Can you run the measure across those, Dawn? So you can probably see we've got 3 yellow pins up the middle of this. Dawn's near the top one, just going past the anchor and down to the tree. And this S shape, starting at the tree, going east and round, back to the anchor, up to the 3rd pin, and then over to the east again. That S shape is most of what we call the wood reef. So you can see it's 100 or so meters front to back, and 50-60 meters across, but makes for probably a 200-250 meter swim along. So this is an interesting little soft fibrous reef because it's compressed trees. It's not peat as far as I can see, because you could still cut it into slices and make furniture out of it if you really wanted to. And on the top of these features, where it looks just like sand waves, so outside the S, where Dawn is wiggling at the minute, that seabed is still wood. If you brush the sea back, you can clear sort of village hall sized areas of blackened, compressed, still hard wood. And so these are apparently the remains of an oak forest that was probably about 10,000 years old, or sorry, about 10,000 years ago. And from the size of the tree, can you indicate the tree, Dawn? Which is down at the south of the site, at that sort of bottom yellow pin. From the size of the tree, apparently these trees were about 300 years old and densely forested when they were knocked down. And there's conjecture that this was the Tunguska event that threw a tsunami down the North Sea and knocked all the trees over. Whether that's true or just people desperately looking to explain a tree, I don't know. So if I share a thing, I'll stop Dawn sharing for a minute, and I go over to, I think Picasa, that's what I'm doing. I go over to Picasa and share those. Then almost any dive on the way to the wood reef starts with a lot of sand, and then depending on what part of the wood reef you hit, you find these odd, clearly organic shapes. And this is where there are trees or tree matter stuck in clay, iced around with sand. These form ridges where the tree matter has been cut away. So it seems like the tree matter is an escarpment which is broken away at an edge as it tips up and gets exposed and rots away. But the surface of it is just covered, because unlike a rock, which might be too hard for some animals to hold on to or grow on, unlike chalk that's soft and disappears when, I've got a couple more people, or Karen's arrived, and Karen's been brought in, or unlike chalk, which is easily eroded, gets smashed, broken away, and has a fast turnover, this is a happy medium where, because it's wood, it's got an excellent key for things to stick on. So after we found this, and we had Joe Porter and Mary from the Natural History Museum come and look at our stuff, we added about 10% to our overall find for the reef, the whole of the Norfolk Reef area, because of this, because it was such a good site for bryozoans and hydroids. So here you can see we've got plumose anemones, elegant anemones, lots of crabs. There's always lots of crabs on there, and all with a dusting of sand. So it's not a big scenic site unless you get some sort of lovely, I want to get my sort of divers to come with you, and then they can set it off nicely. So there's the usual lots of crabs. This is Cat with Chris in the background. Viz out by this wood isn't always brilliant, so Chris is probably only about 3 meters away. We're just about doing social distancing here before it was fashionable, and this is shot with a fisheye lens, so it gives the impression of better visibility. It was decent but not excellent, probably a reasonable 5 meters, but like a lot of these sites, they're very shallow. So this is about 8 meters down. So there's lots and lots of light, so you have a chance to see silhouettes. People aren't just lost in the blackness. We'll skip through these as a collection, and you can see Cat's just discovering some hornwrack. There's some bugula there, which I'm sure is now called something else. Lots of hydroids, anemones, and a looming Chris over the top. We've had quite good nudibranchs last year. Exgenolus, I can't remember what the new name for these is now, but we'll get back to that. Lots of squirt cover, and you can see they're fairly sizable. The exposed edge is broad, 3-4 meters wide, and if Chris, who has the camera with the red strobes on, started dusting around in amongst the sand, you'd find it's still wood over there. So the wood area is tens of meters wide. It's just only exposed at its edge, where the sand is blown away. And this is the reason Dawn found it in the first place, that she found a line of lobster pots that were trapped against the edge, which had then been inundated by sand. So whether the fishermen knew anything about that or not, we'll never know. I think it was probably just an accident. They know things like crabs and lobsters travel about, and they just drop their pots to find them. And whether it's a matter of luck they catch things, or a matter of bad luck that those things or those pots get inundated with sand and trapped, I think it's probably 50-50. We get lots of lobsters along this line. Lobsters like a bit of cover, and they like to excavate under the edge of the wood, and the wood has lots of naturally occurring voids and crevices in it as well. The crabs tend to be on top. The lobsters tend to walk around and probably snip the crabs to bits. You can see there, we've got plenty of hydroids, some nudibranchs right in the middle, and big fat crabs underneath, usually smaller crabs on top. This is a sea scorpion just under one of these lost or clods of rope from lost pots. And it's a broken line. You can follow that whole S, but it's more or less obvious. In some places it stands probably 1.5 meters high. In other places you're just seeing slight nubs of wood. But you'll always know there's something there, because these anemones are all fixed, have to be fixed to something reasonably solid. Now you've got some Nemetesia as well, some Nemetesia antonina, and we must be running into a bit of current. You can start to see the crud is streaking in the current. And so are the divers. Look at them, they're so brave. We had a good run last year, because a lot of the time people try to go out to the wood and it's hit or miss, and found the wood every time by going to the Vera, through it and on north, hit the wood, then run along the S, turn back, and on the top line of the S, then as the S starts to turn back east, we keep going straight down, and that takes us to other areas like the anchor we'll see in a minute, and then on to the main tree. And I think every dive I had at Cley, where I tried to find the wood, we did the whole tour: wreck, wood, anchor and tree, which feels rewarding. And we even had some inshore chalk, which we'll investigate in a bit. Pete will be wondering what the hell's going on. There's somebody here in dry gloves and no hood. And not only is Cat unbelievably tough, very, very hardy, a very macho diver, the water's about 20 degrees. So it's really not cold. I think Cat, like me, finds that the dry gloves stop the leaks going up your arms, and they work brilliantly for that. So more animal encrusts, lots of Diplosoma spongiform, sort of light grey stuff around here. Another sea scorpion, Torolus bubulus, loads of starfish, lots of lobsters. Here you can see there's a bit of scour on the wood, so it wouldn't be obvious it's wood from the amount of encrusting life on it. And we wonder whether our first records of clay at Cley might actually be having encountered the wood 10 plus years ago and not knowing what it was. But you can see down below it's scoured back and the wood is blackened, but it's not like peat. You can't really pick at it. Well, you can pick at it with your nail, but it doesn't come away. It's not peaty compost, sort of compressed small matter. It's still hard, aligned wood fibre. In a moment, we'll get onto the anchor, which will be a bit more interesting. But as you can see, lots and lots of low wood. As I say, about 250 meters of this stuff, and loads of animals in it. And I guess the joy of it in comparison with, perhaps this is one of the taller bits, that's got to be at least 1 meter high, looks massive, but Cat will be some distance away, and the fisheye is working the perspective to my advantage. That even though this is only an 8-meter dive, the whole of it has probably involved a 600 to 700 meter swim. So we probably did nearly an hour and a half, but a lot of that was transit time. So you'd think, oh, 8 meters, I'll have 2-3 hours on it. But not only does the current get up, but you've got a fair amount of distance to cover. But here we're at the anchor. This is probably about 3 meters long, 2.5 meters high. I think it's an 1890s military pattern anchor. Not sure what the hell it's doing here. It seems that everybody who's ever done anything at sea has thrown something over the side, and I'm sure it's much easier just to leave it there and get another one if it's not your own money. So that seems to mean there's lots of big anchors off the coast, covered in plumose anemones, and you can see in amongst here lots of breadcrumb sponge. You can get an idea of the size because Cat and the anchor are roughly the same distance away. But it's a dirty great anchor. And I think eventually I'll persuade somebody to hang around through the knot hole in the top. Almost everything that's fixed in this area traps pots. So here we've got a pot that's now being broken up because it's tied around the anchor, and now it'll probably stay there almost forever. Another lobster laughing at it. Chris peering through a hole. Unfortunately, he can't be here. He's doing something great and medical, I think. And now we've moved on to the tree. I'm not sure we had time to spend an awful lot of time here, but this is a whole tree about 10,000 years old, not fossilized. It's still oak. And at some point, we're going to core it to try to do some dendrochronology and prove that it is 10,000 years old and not just a random tree. Well, we didn't spend long with that, did we? So now we're heading back and everybody's looking a bit stunned. Okay, so I'll stop sharing that for a minute and say that's the outer part of the reef. And if I ask Dawn to show the whole thing again and zoom out a bit. Dawn's telling me to hang on. Okay, and we'll talk about how that's arranged compared with the other parts of the site, because the wood isn't really a swim that you go straight to. It's really too far out and too narrow. So there you can see we're at the wood. You can see those 3 yellow pins. And if Dawn sort of zooms out and centers the site, and then sort of zooms it back in, you can see all the tracks start from the same point, because we always park in the same area. And that means there's about 100, 150 meters of walk to go out. So we could probably afford to be a bit, oh, here we go, we're a bit closer now. Weirdly, it looks like, oh, I can annotate. So if you zoom in a bit more, Dawn. Are you zooming in a bit more? Okay. Okay, so I'll wait for Dawn to drag it down before I center. So hopefully I've got a pencil to draw on it now. It is a bit laggy, isn't it? You can see there's a big cluster here, and that's the Vera, the shore wreck. So that's only, depending on where the shoreline is, 50, 60, 70 meters offshore. It's a wreck that's about 9. Okay. Well, I was waiting for you to center before I draw. That's not a great color. Okay, so this is the Vera. Is that staying? Okay, so that's the Vera, and now it's moved. Okay, I've tried to clear my drawings and it's not clearing them, so I'll redraw it again. So that's the Vera. Because of the way this is arranged, our wood is up here. And the way we'd normally find these things is by swimming to the Vera, which is exposed at low tide, so you can see metal parts sticking out, and then swimming north, which usually takes you roughly to this part of the wood, and then continuing the wood dive around in that S shape. There's a few other sites around. There's often a very interesting boulder plain around in front of the Vera. There's some chalk that occurs here, and over to one side of the Vera, there's occasional bits of wreckage, which we sometimes see. So probably now, if we talk a little bit about the site layout with some simpler diagrams. So if I kill off Dawn's sharing, and I'll share some stuff. So what we've, okay, so this is the site just really pertaining to the Vera. It's an old site, so there's fun stuff which no longer exists on the shore. But you can see we normally start as close as we can to the Vera, swim out to it. The white line is our historical trace from 2007. And the blue line is one I did more recently. I managed to get another friend to haul around a GPS, and you can see there's some blue bits, and that's the front of the wreck. There's a low front to this. So the whole thing is about 90 meters long, and you can just about swim a whole hull outline of this wreck, and it's a great place to search for nudibranchs. That's one thing. I mean, it's covered in general life, but it seems sort of the low bits of metal seem to attract a really odd mix of nudibranchs. So it's one of the places where we found the largest variety of those. The deepest point on the wreck is probably around 5 meters down. So honestly, this is a nice, easy wreck that you can spend more than a couple of hours on quite simply. Oh, I've had things turn up in chat. Oh, I can see. Okay, so there's Dawn telling me I'm slightly indistinct because it's warning me about low bandwidth. It might be that at the moment I don't need to see any of you. So can I, perhaps if I just say I've blanked all you, I could see you moving at the side. So hopefully that'll improve things. So this is the whole outline of the Vera at Cley. So that's the other major site that we dive there. After the Rosalie, probably the most dived wreck. It's half the length, half the depth, half the distance from shore, and half the walk of the Rosalie. So if you're getting old like I am, it's an easier option. If you're starting out or you're taking in a novice, that's an old BZAC term, isn't it? If you're taking in someone new, it's a great site to introduce people to North Sea diving. And I think our dive hero, Michael, did that. Okay, I've got 10 minutes to go, so we'll leave it at that. Just make a quick look. We've got a sketch on our sort of Twin Wrecks challenge page, so you can get an idea of the layout. I won't labor this, because if you do Norfolk Twin Wrecks challenge as a search, you can just find this page and you can have a look at these pictures. It gives you an idea of the layout, which I think is rather quaint, really, because it doesn't include a lot of the material and the front, which we now know more about, but it does include this kind of layout information, which hopefully means if you swim into the side, which you normally do because it's kind of parallel to the coast, if you hit the engine as a center, you can then work your way around the wreck. There's a nice sort of visible side of hull on the port side. The prop shaft is very obvious. The starboard wreckage is a bit of a mess, but there's a pressure vessel and a boiler which sort of complete a good circuit. And then if you swim off to the west, you can find yourself on the front section, which is low, a bit like greenhouse staging, but extends another 30 or 40 meters to the east. I've got another album to share, so if I stop sharing, oops, no, how do I stop sharing that? I've managed not to be in Zoom. Okay, I'll stop sharing that thing. And I want to share another thing, just quickly. Ooh. Hang on. I've got another window off the side. No, it's not. I think my other programs crashed, so I won't share that for a minute. Let me check. Why haven't I got that available? I don't know. Let's quickly get on to that. It's decided it's not sharing. Oh, no. Sorry, there we are. Okay, this is a quick swim around the Vera with Sasha. I like to make sure all the people I swim around things with have interesting names and preferably are from Europe, so I can go on about Brexit. So this was Sasha, who's German. We had a great swim round. I think he'd regathered himself because he did the swim round the Rosalie in the morning in foot fins and left his loafers on the beach because he'd forgotten his boots. So this is the prop shaft of the wreck. There's around 30-40 meters of that. It runs back from the engine and then ends in nothing because the original bronze propeller was stolen. Possibly the best encrusted piece is a pressure vessel at the side of it, but there's lots of low wreckage. Because it's so shallow, you get excellent algae cover. There's lots of these Sabella pavonina fan worms on it, bryozoans, and either side of the wreck has a bit of a boulder field. It catches gear because people keep trying to drop pots in it, and the fishermen usually lose pots, so it's got a good display of lost pots because there's something like an old derrick or crane that sticks up just as a rope catcher. We've done lots of sort of rubbish removal here, big sections of net, and then just general rubbish. Lots of dead men's fingers, plumose anemones, and elegant anemones on the side. A good population of often sort of bib and sometimes bass circulate round it. This is a view up from under the engine. I'm trying to crack on because we've got about 5 minutes left of official time. Very heavily encrusted, and it's this kind of sort of bryozoan and hydroid turf where we find a lot of nudibranchs. They're not always easy to find because it's heavily encrusted, and they're usually small, not quite as big as the ones you might be used to, Pete. Somebody sent a picture of a Fasolina that they've been sent in from, I think, Scottish kelp earlier this week, and that was 1 inch long, and often the nudibranchs we'll find here are half that. There's a corkwing wrasse amongst the wreckage. There's a picturesque Sasha, I think, on the pressure vessel looking inside. It keeps getting rolled slightly, so you could probably stick your head in it and head and shoulders if you wanted to, but don't. Arty black and white, the usual angry small shore crabs. Because we're actually in the shore, we're almost in the wave action on this site. Dense worms, this is heading around the front section. So we've got dense worms on that. They seem to like the way the current channels around the whole piece. When we put out slack times for the Vera, they're usually 30 minutes before start of slack, and that's to enable normal people to have a normal hour's dive. The slacks move depending on sand, sort of build up around the site, and so usually for the first few weeks of the year we are fine-tuning our slack times, but we always revert. When we give out walk-in times, they are 30 minutes before full slack. So if you don't mind a bit of swimming against current, you can go in early, and you should get an hour of reasonable low current before you surface again. And equally, you can hold on then for as long as you like, knowing the current will only build. One of the fun artifacts of the site, it's complementary to the Rosalie. So the current will carry you towards the wreck from the car park before slack and carries you back to the car park afterwards, which is just unbelievably civilized. I'm sure you'll agree. what other things I should mention? I should mention the Boulder Plain. So if I bring up some more sharing for the last few minutes and see if I've got Google Earth. I haven't brought it up, so I'll just talk about it in general terms on one of my other pictures. We'd say that the site is really pretty easy to understand. It's just, where am I? It's just sort of using the Vera as a reference means you're offset from the wood, which is up here. Inshore, we have last year clay and chalk exposures, and as a final piece of fun, the Boulder Plain here, which exists almost every year, of small cobbles, maybe some boulders, on the way to the Rosalie, often has a flush of Onchidoris bilamellata. And they're a tiny nudibranch that eats barnacles. So those cobbles and boulders get covered in barnacles, and most years we have a flush of these, and not just one or two, but thousands of them, to the extent that the rocks are often covered with them and people don't recognize them as separate nudibranchs. These are a typical Dorid nudibranch. They're oval with a lovely little rosette round the back. Nice, cute little rhinophores, but when they carpet the floor and they're brown and dappled, they just disappear. So this is a thing to do. Have a good old look at the boulders next time you dive Cley or fancy diving Cley. And this is one of the oddities there, that these things turn up in their tens of thousands there for a short period at the start of the year. Hopefully that's been good fun. If anybody would like to stay on and chat, then we can throw it open. But oh, everybody's coming back. It's all very exciting. Penny, Cat. Excellent. I've left microphones open where you've got them open. So we can hear that Pete's having abuse from his family. They're not used to you indoors. I thought you were allowed to go outside. I realise now you'd been sent outside. So that makes sense.
Well, I have been. There's a family quiz tonight, but I said I had something a prior engagement. So. Honestly, teenagers. I'll switch it off. It's quite noisy.
Yeah. Well, don't worry at all. I'm assuming people have come back because they either had questions or wanted to chat some more. So I guess mute yourselves if you're happy to listen. Unmute yourselves if you have anything you'd like to ask, and I'll throw the floor open. Other than to stop you for a minute butting in and say, I was just saying, wasn't I, that the new name for Genolus was Antiopella.
Close enough.
Yes, Antiopella.
Cristatus.
I knew the other bit. Yes.
No, it's now Cristatus, not Cristata.
Oh, isn't that horrible? I'm sure it's the same. Anyway.
It's the opposite to whatever it was.
Yes. It's another action by taxonomists who don't care for people's lives. That's what it is. Anyway, Inga has arrived. We must admit Inga, because she arrived. I noticed her in the last minute of the other meeting. So before she joins in audio, we should all sympathise with Inga. Hello, Inga. I'm sorry you arrived. I noticed you late in the talk because I was in full flow and waving windows around. So sorry about that. We'll do our best with this one to try to make a recording available. So anything you choose to say, protect yourselves, be circumspect about what you say, just in case it's held against you in 50 years' time. Okay, so anybody got any questions? In fact, I'll pin myself, and then we don't have to watch Pete rolling on the floor. Okay, so does anybody have any questions?
Yes. Hello.
Oh, hello. Hi.
Can
Hi,
you
Tanis.
can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Hopefully we can all hear you,
Good.
Tanner.
So the first question is your prediction for the first dive this year.
Oh,
Well, I'm hoping, like Sports Direct and who was it? Who Unlikely had decided they were vital. We can be deemed an essential, and Weatherspoons probably. We can be deemed an essential service by the time the dive season proper starts down here. Where, I mean, poor Pete probably has people tutting at him if he goes near the sea. Our dive season doesn't really start for, I mean, inshore, or I guess offshore, sorry, for at least a month yet. And the nice inshore diving isn't really there until July, late June at the very earliest. So I'd have thought we're not being too disadvantaged by this. We can work on our fitness and, I guess, fat reserves for the dive season. And the first good dives will probably be in July. And hopefully by that time, things will have settled down.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Not as mysterious as I'd hoped. One of the things I'm meaning to do with these talks is be more thoughtful and perhaps involve people who have other material on them. So we did Wayborn last week, and Nick mentioned that he'd seen an anchor that none of the rest of us had seen. So when we redo Wayborn, I've said, could Nick do 5 minutes on that, so that if people see it, they know it's the same thing. And we can decide whether it's a magnificent piece of architectural or nautical archaeology, or whether in fact it's something left by a cable laying ship from the 80s and of no interest at all. We'll wait to see.
Cable laying 80s.
Yeah, Pete's just asked a good question about the GPS mapping process. Unfortunately, we've not got any of the other people who I've tortured by doing this. All we do is stick a phone running an application. I was just going to hold up a phone. It's really ridiculous. You've probably seen a phone before.
I can run Maverick up if you like.
Yeah. That'd be interesting. I wonder whether you can share from a phone into this.
No, this isn't.
Yes, you can.
Well, when
you can.
You could. So we have Android phones, and we intentionally bought waterproof phones so that we weren't scared of handling them around the sea. So when they're new, they're actually submersible. But if you put them in a freezer bag, in a waterproof box, and float them on the surface, you can then be reasonably happy that any old phone would be able to do this. We're Android, and we run an application called Mavericks, which
Maverick.
It is Maverick. I thought it was Mavericks.
I don't know.
It's a Trivial Pursuits kind of problem. We run an application called Maverick, which allows us to run and record a track and store them. And one of the nice things you can do with that is, after you've taken it around, dragged on a reel for the course of a dive, is that you can email the track to yourself or your significant other and prove you're actually back on the surface, which is reassuring for relatives and family when they're not there and they're convinced you're going to sort of kill yourself on these dives. It's a freebie application, and it has sort of buttons for starting GPS on your phone and starting a record. What it's not great at is cleanly restarting a track if it considers your other dive that day is within a sort of phone living memory. And often it'll create these rather massive concatenated tracks over the course of a couple of days, and which can include a trip home and back again.
I can't remember the diving one that asked me to think up
Okay.
the version for anything old.
Yeah. The dark line here is a track from one of Dawn's runs. Dawn's have been sort of running around all over the place. This is a circular run across fields. And so this can be recorded. It tells you the speed you were going. You can drop in to any point, move your track around and find out sort of where you were, what you were doing. And it produces a GPX file, which you can just open in Google Earth. And if you save it as one of, I think, my places on Google Earth, it sticks. So if you dive and dive and dive again, you can see your coverage of a site build up. And also, if you found an interesting point on your dive, you've then got a much better idea of how far you are from your entry point and a heading, which is useful particularly for sites like Cley and Overstrand, where the number of landmarks on the way to something are limited. Somewhere like sort of Sheringham, you've got lots of interesting landscape. At Cley and Overstrand, you're aiming to get to significant places usually, so a bit more collateral information's dead handy.
The other two questions.
We have got two more questions come in. I'll answer Pete because he's a TG person. We'll do the Olympus TG question first. The GPS on the TG doesn't work underwater. That's the limit on that. So
it's got quite a lag on it as well, hasn't it? You set it up, it takes about 10-20 minutes before it's happy.
Well, I think it would depend on your coverage and how much you'd moved. It's not a fast locking GPS like modern phone GPSs are.
Oh, I just meant, sorry, Rob, I just meant if you tried using it in the same manner that you use your phone.
Oh, just
like on top of your SMB or something.
Good question.
Yeah, like dry, not underwater. Yeah.
Yeah, we've used it to get dive marks on boats, which you can do in a similar way, because some dive skippers are really funny about you getting your phone out and going, that's where I am. But if you just leave a camera running, or you take a nice picture of the smiling psychopath on the deck of the boat, you'll get it GPS marked. So to self get the mark he won't give you. On the whole, it's not as good a GPS or as utilitarian a GPS as most of the phones. It doesn't lock as fast. I think it displays in degrees, minutes, seconds, although you can retrieve, I'm not sure what the embedded format is, whether the embedded format is to seconds as well. So as far as accuracy goes and precision, there's lots of debate to do. I think for a dive, it will be accurate enough. You need to make sure it's locked on, because I think it only does the GPS network, whereas most phones now do the Russian network as well, the GLONASS satellites. So they lock super fast. So overall, it's a good thing to have. If you have your GPS running and you submerge, all your pictures will be tagged with your start of dive, which again is a fun thing to have, but the GPS will burn through battery faster. So swings and roundabouts. If you get experience with it, it's handy to have them tagged at a site. It's not as beneficial to a long day's diving because you might run out of battery. That's what I'd say to close off. So it's useful, not a killer app on it. Probably more useful for trekking on land. Rob's asked about thoughts of new dive targets based on the bathymetry, and I think probably Cley is one of the sites where we probably don't have a huge number of suggestions. I share Google Earth and I go there. Cley is fairly well known. Ooh.
That's crashed, hasn't it? Do you want me to bring mine up again?
Oh no, it's just waiting gormlessly. Oh, it's slowly going to zoom in.
While waiting, you could say Overstrand. We've got a few things on to look at there.
Yeah, Overstrand is of particular interest and has lots of strange little sort of fragments of weird stuff going on. No, this is Cley.
Ah, sorry.
Whereas I think Cley, there aren't that many features and we've covered it quite well. If I zoom in a bit, there'll be a bit of a lag. Every year, more or less, is uncovered. So I think we could fairly say that... we'll come to you in a minute, Inga. I'll finish a ramble and then we'll get to you. The site as a whole is interesting, but the major landmarks are separated, and the features on the way to them are low. So like I said, there's low chalk exposures very close in around here, but they're pretty well scrubbed. West of this kind of mark, we've seen almost nothing.
Yeah, it's just sand.
So whilst we'd like to regularly visit, we think there's not much there, and we'd spend speculative time perhaps more in this area where we think there's the front of, or maybe some of the remaining front of the Vera.
And more chalk bedrock that way as well.
And some more chalk bedrock as you get into things like, well, towards Salthouse, and there's the banks. There's East Bank and East-West Bank over to that side, both oddly named. And there's more to discover there. Here, aside from the front of the Vera, which might be around there, and scattered boulders, there's not much else. But I guess this is bears repeat viewing. And now that we kind of better understand that it's this sort of sigmoid S shape, it might be worth swimming out further to see, does anything more get uncovered here? Just looking at the wood area, what we find some years is there's kind of amphitheatre sections that are uncovered, that sort of are deep and bowl-like, and I'm sure that won't be all there is, but these bodies of sand move around and unpredictably uncover things. So I think I'd concentrate on exhausting the exploration of the wood, and then moving to the east to see what's going on at the banks. Hope that makes sense, Rob.
Yep.
So Inga, was that a question suggestion you had?
No, I was just trying to orientate myself on the map where the car park was, so that's fine.
Okay, so it made sense in the end. Excellent. Okay, what else have we got to say? I had some gentle notes on Cley, and it's really all covered. I think it's probably about 3 years ago now that we had massive sand build-up, which covered all the inshore chalk and the boulders to quite an extent. But that was fascinating because the sand build-up turned into sand mason meadows. So the whole of the seabed felt like it was upholstered. It was soft. And those get very rich in crabs and starfish. So we had sort of many tens of thousands of tiny starfish spat basically arrive there and grow on through the season. They wiped out that and then uncovered the boulders. But that was an interesting sort of seasonal bloom that we got from them. Excellent. So any more questions? Excellent. Well, I don't want to sort of labour these. I want to keep them so they're fun and interesting. If you've got extra jolly stuff to throw in, that's great. I think we've done a couple of polls on which things we talk about, and I think perhaps whilst it's fresh in our memory, we might well redo Weybourne. Weybourne has the bigger wreck, the Rosalie, will do a better gallery. But one thing I was going to share during the main call, and I forgot, was my YouTube page, and to point out, oh, I know I'm trying to decide which. Oh, God.
Which tab?
Which tab is it? It's not that one. I've got 70 tabs running on that one. Oh, sorry, it's a show all windows. I'm sure that doesn't turn up at the, so I've got about 1,000 different things running up. Oh, that one, that's the one. Sorry about that. On my YouTube page, which is findable with my name, or Seasearch East, there's videos on quite a few of these things, and you can search through by name. And because I did 2 nice films that are properly edited, nicely subtitled, and aren't just a furious thrash around a site, topped and tailed with titles. There are 2 Norfolk Wildlife Trust films. There's North Norfolk's Unique Reef, which does a bit of everything. And then there's Cley's Secret Sea, which is this one. And that does this talk, but nicely presented. I think probably with a voiceover and subtitles. And that's sort of 7 minutes of digest, sort of round the wreck, featuring Inga.
Oh, yes.
So it's the best dive I've had around the Vera. Inga models beautifully, just sweeping through those open spaces, to amply demonstrating. I did think I had maybe one that's a whole, yeah, there is one that is just Cley as well, slightly longer. But that's a nice trip around the significant parts of both the Vera at Cley and the wood as well, with a bit of descriptive stuff. So those are worth browsing. I probably will edit this talk up, because I've said I would, just to see how awful it seems to actually watch it. And we'll play top and tail with a title. Notch, maybe I'll put the chat on the end just to see what people think. And then if it's positively thought about, perhaps we'll do this with a bit more finesse. And if people find it deeply tedious and say, no, that made me vomit because the whole thing was so disjointed, we won't worry so much about that. If everybody's happy, we'll draw a line under it then. We've done about an hour. Oh,
yeah, can I just ask, you were talking about the East Bank. Is that the access from a long walk from a car park? How did you have you actually?
Yes. Okay. I'll share Google Earth again, and we can zip along and have a look. So, East Bank is the east bank of the Cley Marshes.
Let's see you find it.
Yeah. So I think it's not that one, is it? Is it that one?
On mine.
I think it is that one. Anyway, so there's Cley, the village.
That's the Salthouse Road, isn't it?
No, that's Cley, the village. That's the beach road down to the main Cley site, and then there's there's a big splodge. There's the Norfolk Wildlife Trust Centre.
Nature Centre.
Set back from the road. So East Bank is one of 2 roads or tracks that take you from the road off or up to the coast, and both of them have little car parks, which are nominally Norfolk Wildlife Trust car parks. So this is the start of East Bank. And as you drive along the road, you'll see there's one car park on the north side, and that's kind of a normal birdwatcher's car park, and then there's some other weird stuff that goes on here with
Cley spike.
no, there's a little view, an observation point over here, but the major landmark is this sort of reed surrounded pond, which is an easy thing to spot. So this is East Bank, and you can park here. You can see there's space for, there'd be space for a dozen cars, but then nobody would be able to get in and out. So normally half a dozen cars fills it, and that allows Michael space to put up his clothes area to dry his wetsuit between dives. And as soon as he's done that, people stop parking there. There's apparently nothing less unattractive than either Michael in swimming trunks or his wetsuit hanging up. I think it makes it look like a gypsy encampment, especially if we've got our van there. That tends to drive people away as well. And so from that point, it's a simple walk.
It's a long walk.
Oh, a long walk, you say. How far is that walk? Oh, it's
not a kilometre.
It's just under just under a kilometre.
A kilometre.
Okay, so it's a.
You need a trolley.
Slightly.
You need a trolley.
It doesn't really suit a trolley. This actually is an easy walk because it's a hard-packed but narrow path. It would depend on the width of your trolley, which ends in the usual Norfolk gravel bank. So yeah, only 900-metre walk. And when you get there,
if the tide's in, if the tide's out, it's a kilometre.
Yeah, that's only really the start of it, because a bit like the other sites, this one has a sandy run-in and then bands of boulders. And I think I found that the Boulder Plain at around 600 metres out was the most interesting.
I think this is the one I haven't done, isn't it? I've only done one of the two.
Yeah. So there are very interesting boulder bands with sand in between. Michael has done this more than anyone, and it is an interesting dive. But the primary interest was boulder bands, which are, I think, probably from 300 metres out and onward and recurring. The ones 400 metres plus out are very heavily encrusted and very interesting. They've got sort of low, large sponges. But it is a bit of a challenge. It's a site I think I've only done a couple of times.
You did it twice in one day, didn't you?
Michael's done it more, so perhaps we'll challenge him to tell us things that nobody else knows. East-West Bank.
Is it shorter from the car park or the Cley? But then that's a difficult walk.
Yeah, you mean sort of walking from the
walking on the
Cley
gravel,
car
it'll
park.
kill you.
I think
On a low tide, it'd be all right.
On the gravel.
yeah, I think on the gravel it would be a hell of a walk. I think even at low tide on the packed sand, it would be hard. It would be wearing. That's a good word. And you'd be dealing with winding and unwinding the tide as well as the long swim. I think this is a better prospect as a swim out around slack and back again than an attempt to drift into something at random and back again. I did once drift from Cley up in this direction, but because when you drift, you don't tend to cover as much distance out, I never saw any of the interesting boulders. I saw the front of the Vera somewhere, and then it turned, and it must have been a spring.
It was a pretty fast drift, almost no slack.
Because there was almost no slack, and I came back pretty well. And Peter's saying, a bold fin. That's a good phrase for it. A bold fin. So I think I probably covered, half a mile there and back when I drifted, and that didn't allow me to swim out far enough to the interesting stuff. If you're after interesting stuff and a bit of a swim, then this down here is the car park for what has become just sort of tautologically known as East-West Bank, because Michael called it West Bank, but it was east of East Bank. And so it just seemed funny to call it East-West Bank. It's probably got a proper name.
Rob, sorry to interrupt. Rob, equidistant between East-West Bank and equidistant between East-West Bank and East Bank. There's something that you've zoomed in. There's some feature out at sea. What's that?
That thing. I think that.
No, in the sea. No, in the sea. That one. Yeah.
That one. The one
There you go. That's the baby. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. We had a lag. I went straight to it, like the masterful orator I am. I don't know. I think perhaps.
That's interesting. It's quite a big feature.
Yeah, perhaps this is a thing that that Rob was asking about. So here's a dive target.
That is a thing.
And the only challenge is
getting there.
That thing.
That's a long wall. That one.
That thing is probably 300 plus meters off, equidistant between two walks.
Yeah.
One is a 900-meter walk, and the other, I think,
700.
I think, is a 600 or 700-meter walk. So it's a bold fin.
Blimey, been going for half an hour.
Yeah, so let me move things out the way.
It's interesting, man. The big feature.
So Rob's quite right, and what I think we might do is say, well, we'll collect some features and have an idea of places we may sort of return or target diving at, because I mean, some of these are probably big sandbanks. Some of them might be sandbanks over features, and others could be low features. Because we know that low chalk with boulders on top starts at Cley, and so there's plenty to find on the right year, and you might get a sandy year.
Pete says no boats.
Peter said no boats. So we don't use boats much because that sort of soft gravelly shore is really tough to launch stuff over. You really need a crawler. We did do a couple of years when we used an inflatable quite a lot. Our inflatable fell out of use, and we then just did lots of long swims because we can.
Because we're hard.
Because we're dead hard, you see. Our longest swim's a kilometre. So that.
There and back.
It goes 2 kilometres round. So I think we might try and do more with kayaks, because I mean the access points aren't big. The launch points for these are tough. There is a beach with a decent drive down, but that's about 10 miles away. So it's a long buzz in a small boat. The bigger boats, it's a 15-mile run round, and that's why we don't tend to use boats very much. Occasionally, one of the clubs will be a bit of a treat, and we'll say, "Oh, let's do some inshore stuff," and we tend then to actually they go slightly further offshore because it's the stuff we can't reach from the shore. But as projects, if we get back to being able to use the sea again, and we get our van back, we might take the kayak up and do more kayak-supported long swims. So we can do a kayak out, drop people on the feature, having used surface GPS, which would be reasonably accurate, and then allow that person to swim back after doing a decent dive. So we make more of the air. You won't have to burn it doing so half the swim. You'll have more time out, and you can take more time on the way back. So that may be a halfway house. Oh, Inga has a small rib. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'd muted Inga because I kept hearing her do unspeakable things in the background. So great. I think that's the thing. If there are clubs who can offer a bit of boat support, that's great. We haven't banked on it. If there's a boat available, that's brilliant. I think on that up note, let's draw this to a close. Everybody happy with that?
I think you muted them again.
Oh, I've muted you, but you could nod. You could nod. I could display all of you, and you can all nod. Excellent. So thanks very much. It's nice to have a talk with Robin, because Rob is the person who did the work on making the DEFRA bathymetry much more attractive and easy to understand. So that's been a boon to doing this kind of stuff. And I think perhaps once we've been through all these talks, site by site, we'll maybe do a whole talk on sort of interesting areas on the bathymetry after we've had time kind of to annotate that and take the other tracks off so we can concentrate on it. Okay, so thanks everybody.
Sorry,
I would say on the whole, most people's Zoom appearance is improving markedly. It looks as though Inga and Nick, we're staring at you through a puddle, which is dreamy.
Vaseline on your lens.
Yeah.
No, we've just got a crap internet connection.
Excellent. Okay, so night everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye all.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Oh, I'm going to take myself off.